Starting off, let's cover the abilities. Pale Rider's primary fire ability is Bullpup Machine Gun. This weapon is a rapid-fire machine gun with recoil, heavy accuracy loss, and fall off at long range. The weapon does 50 damage per shot that drops to 21 at range, has a 26 round magazine, and fires a shot every 0.1 seconds. Using secondary fire allows Pale Rider to steady its weapon, drastically increasing accuracy but reducing movement speed. Bullpup Machine Gun can score headshots for double damage. Pale Rider's F ability is Hand Grenade. Throw a grenade that bursts on contact with a surface or an enemy, dealing 400 to 150 damage based on distance. Use this 8-second cooldown for max value against grouped up enemies, or to finish off an enemy when forced to reload. Pale Rider's E ability is EMP Grenade. Temporarily slow enemy movement speed with a throwing grenade that explodes in a small area on impact. Use this 10-second cooldown against grouped up enemies in exposed positions to increase the time you and your teammates have to kill them. Pale Rider's C ability is Repair Pod. Toss a 200 hit point pod that heals in a small area for 4 seconds. This 14-second cooldown heals Pale Rider and teammates for 200 hit points a second for a total of 800 HP. Place the pod to heal up and sustain while on a flank, or use it to support a weak teammate. Pale Rider's left shift ability is Thruster Gauge, a 2-section mobility bar. It can be used slowly to sprint or to hover in mid-air, or each bar can be fully expended as a short-range dash. Use it to sprint onto aggressive flanks, and to dash quickly to cover when threatened. Pale Rider's G maneuver ability is Hades. Increase movement speed and primary fire damage for the duration of the ability. This ability lasts for 15 seconds and doubles the damage of Pale Rider's primary fire. This ability stacks with headshot damage to deal 4 times damage per shot. Use this ultimate ability to flank quickly and aggressively with the speed boost, and output immense pressure with the double damage buff. With the abilities down, let's talk about Pale Rider's strengths and weaknesses. Pale Rider is a reliable mobile suit, and will perform well on most maps and against most opposition. With high mid-range damage, high horizontal mobility, self-sustain, and the threat of an extremely powerful ultimate, Pale Rider is an absolute demon while flanking. Pale Rider is strongest when running mid-range on the sides of the enemy, sneaking shots onto their backline and being an absolute nuisance. And Repair Pod is what best enables Pale Rider for this. As opposed to similar mid-range mobile suits like Gundam and Ashimar, Pale Rider has a strong self-healing ability. These other mobile suits have to wait for the middle of teamfights to effectively flank, because if they look for early opportunities, they might be brought to low HP by spam damage and have to disengage as the fight starts. Pale Rider's Repair Pod, however, allows more flexibility as random damage can be healed up, so Pale Rider doesn't have to return to its team if brought to low hit points. With the 800 healing of Repair Pod, Pale Rider has an effective 1800 hit points. It has 800 more effective HP than other mid-range mobile suits, so it can tank more damage and therefore stay in aggressive flank positions longer. Pale Rider must be careful of big bursts of damage though, as being one-shot by a mobile suit like GM Sniper will bypass all of this. Also, make sure to place Repair Pod behind cover as it can be destroyed. However, Pale Rider has another even stronger ability for flanking. Pale Rider's G maneuver allows it to flank extremely powerfully. Lasting 15 seconds, it increases movement speed, which allows it to position very aggressively. Combining this with double damage from the ultimate ability and 800 HP from Repair Pod, Pale Rider is absolutely terrifying during its ultimate. While Pale Rider is a very powerful mobile suit, it does have 2 major weaknesses. The first of which is that Pale Rider lacks good capabilities to deal with close range threats and shield users. It will 100% lose to a shield user like Sazabi forcing a close fight, and usually to a melee character like Barbatos. Pale Rider does have good escape mobility though, so it won't always die in these battles, but it will usually be forced out of important positions during these 1v1s and be unable to retake them. Pale Rider's other major weakness is that it lacks vertical mobility, so it will not be able to reach high grounds without an access path. Unable to reach these important locations, Pale Rider will suffer on vertical maps, as it simply cannot play in ideal spots. Even if the high grounds do have access paths, if something forces Pale Rider to drop during a fight, it will be unable to quickly regain the safe high ground. It will be forced to waste a bunch of time to path to high ground again, or be forced to stay in a suboptimal position for the rest of the fight. So, with this analysis covered, when should you play Pale Rider? Since Pale Rider is a medium-range mobile suit, it thrives best on maps with a majority mid-range sightlines. While Pale Rider can best some mobile suits at close range and shield mobile suits pose a massive threat. These mobile suits are most strong on maps with many tight spaces and corridors, so avoid playing Pale Rider on these sorts of maps. Likewise, Pale Rider will struggle on maps where it is forced to fight at long range against sniper characters like GM Sniper and Ashimar, so avoid these too. Additionally, Pale Rider will face some difficulties with vertical maps. While a well set up Pale Rider can prove quite formidable on a high ground, this requires it to have reached it in the first place. So maps where Pale Rider cannot path to important high grounds or could be forced off of them are not ideal. However, the most important criteria for a good Pale Rider map is how effectively it can flank on it. As I mentioned before, Pale Rider specializes in taking and maintaining aggressive flank positions. There are better mobile suits to choose if Pale Rider cannot flank, so choose Pale Rider on maps with strong, mid-range flank routes and you will find great success. Moving on to the how-to. How do you play Pale Rider? I cannot say enough how effective Pale Rider is at flanking, so this is the most important concept to understand for playing Pale Rider well. There's more complexity to this than just go run to the side of the enemy, though. Pale Rider should always play on flank routes that are mid-range from the enemy. Too close and it risks being caught out and destroyed. Too far and its damage will fall off. As mentioned before, Pale Rider excels at playing aggressively for long durations on the flank. It does not need as much team support as other mid-range damage dealers, so choose flank positions that match its criteria. Usually, one of the left or right side flank routes will be further away from your team's core. This flank path will typically be the ideal one for Pale Rider to take, especially when it has its G maneuver available. This ultimate ability enables Pale Rider to cover even more distance and provide even more threat. These further away routes also consequently provide the best angles to damage the enemy team, so Pale Rider's G maneuver will gain even more value. Like I said, Pale Rider is an absolute beast while using ultimate on the flank, but there is a way to make it even more monstrous. Combining its G maneuver with Metis' G maneuver that boosts damage dealt and reduces damage taken makes for an even more destructive ultimate. This combo will simply wipe away enemy teams, and should be used whenever a Pale Rider has a Metis on its team. Just remember, Pale Rider's G maneuver is very powerful, so it should absolutely not be wasted, and instead should be used to turn the tide while the fight is still even. While it might make for a good montage, it is too valuable to waste on cleaning up fights. Now, let's get into specifics on cooldowns. After seeing an enemy in general gameplay, Pale Rider has 3 offensive options available. It can use its primary fire bullpup machine gun, throw a grenade, or use an EMP grenade. So it's important to understand when each should be used. Pale Rider's primary fire ability should be used in most occasions since it is the main source of damage. Against 1 or 2 enemies, shooting and hitting your shots will simply be the best option in almost all situations. It is important to understand that whenever you use a grenade or an EMP grenade, you are trading this time for primary fire output. However, both grenades still have their times for use. Hand grenades are best used against clumps of 3 or more enemies, as the group damage has a higher damage output than primary fire and also saves ammo. Against 1 or 2 enemies, primary fire and damage will have a higher output though, so don't waste your grenades. There are occasions where a grenade against a solo target is very valuable though. Sometimes, Pale Rider will run out of ammo right before a kill is secured. This is the perfect time for the area of effect grenade to finish it off, as reloading in the situation usually means a lost kill or even death. EMP grenade is very situational as it does not deal any damage, but slows the enemy instead. This grenade should be used in very specific situations where the benefit of slowing the enemy is higher than any sort of damage Pale Rider can deal. So, use the EMP grenade when enemies are fleeing or grouped up in exposed areas. As Pale Rider is a damage dealer, it is usually best for it to just focus on dealing damage. However, sometimes slowing a group of enemies for your team is best, but it depends on whether your team is able to put enough damage onto them or not. Usually this is not the case, but EMP grenade still does have potential. Don't be afraid to experiment though. As a flanker, Pale Rider will get so much benefit from being unpredictable and doing unexpected things, so don't be afraid to try things out. Play for flanks sometimes, hide behind the enemy and jump out into their backline in others. With Pale Rider's mobility and self-sustain, there is so much potential for creativity and also for destruction. If Pale Rider is your type of character, make sure to check out my Ashimar guide, since it is a very similar mobile suit. You can find this guide and others in the playlist right here. Thanks so much for watching the video guys. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I have 9 more of these guides set to release for the remaining mobile suits, so keep tuned for more.